Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully brushed dirt away from the strange object. The artifact was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It looked like metal, but it felt warm and seemed to pulse with a soft blue light. The surface was smooth and curved, almost like it had grown instead of being built. Sarah worked on a research ship called the Endeavor. She was a scientist who studied old alien things. Her team had been exploring dead planets for months, looking for clues about civilizations that had disappeared long ago. This planet was supposed to be empty, just rocks and dust. But they had found something amazing. The artifact was buried deep in what used to be a city. The buildings around it were broken and covered with sand. But this one object was perfect. It was about the size of a basketball and covered with symbols that seemed to move when Sarah looked at them directly. "What do you think it is?" asked Dr. James Park, her research partner. He stood next to her holding a scanner that made soft beeping sounds. "I don't know," Sarah said, "but it's definitely not human technology. The materials are completely unknown. And look at these symbols, they're not carved into the surface. They're part of it somehow." The planet they were on sat at the edge of a dangerous area of space called the Shrouded Sector. No one went there anymore. The space was filled with strange clouds and gravity problems that made ships crash. Even the best pilots stayed away from it. But Sarah had found old records that talked about this place. Long ago, before humans had traveled to the stars, there had been aliens here. They were called the Veil Thara. The record said they were very powerful and could do things with their minds that seemed like magic. Then suddenly, they had disappeared. Most people thought the stories were just myths, but Sarah believed they were real. She had spent years looking for proof, and now she might have found it. The artifact suddenly became warmer. The blue light got brighter and the symbols started moving faster. Sarah felt a strange tingling in her fingers where she touched it. "Sarah, back away from that thing," James said. His scanner was beeping faster now. The energy readings are going crazy, but Sarah couldn't move. The artifact felt like it was calling to her somehow. The symbols on its surface began to glow, and she could almost understand what they meant. It was like trying to remember a word that was on the tip of her tongue. "It's trying to communicate," she whispered. "I think it's responding to human touch." James grabbed her arm. "We need to get this back to the ship. The captain needs to see this." They carefully lifted the artifact and carried it to their shuttle. During the short flight back to the Endeavor, the object stayed quiet. But Sarah could feel it somehow, like it was waiting for something. Captain Rodriguez was a serious man who had seen many strange things in space. But when Sarah showed him the artifact, his eyes went wide. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked. "In the ruins of what looks like a temple," Sarah said. "Captain, I think this might be Veil Thara technology. The stories about them might be true." The captain was quiet for a long moment. He had heard the old stories too. Every spacer had. The Veil Thara were supposed to be the most advanced race the galaxy had ever known. They could control matter with their thoughts and travel between dimensions. But they had vanished thousands of years ago, leaving only warnings to stay away from their space. "Put it in the secure lab," the captain said finally, "and be careful. If this really is their technology, we have no idea what it might do." Sarah spent the next 3 days studying the artifact. It responded to her touch, but not to anyone else. When she held it, the symbols would light up and move around the surface like they were alive. Sometimes she thought she could almost hear voices, very faint and far away. On the 4th day, something changed. Sarah was alone in the lab running tests on the artifact. She had been working for hours trying to understand how it worked. The object was warm in her hands and the symbols were moving in patterns that almost made sense. Suddenly, she understood. The symbols weren't just decoration, they were a key. Her mind somehow knew what to do. She pressed her fingers against 3 specific symbols at the same time. The artifact exploded with light. Not harmful light, but something that filled the entire room with a soft blue glow. Sarah felt a surge of energy flow through her. And for just a moment, she could sense something vast and ancient reaching out to her from far away. Then the light faded, and the artifact went dark. But something had happened. Deep in space, in the hidden places where the Veil Thara lived, ancient machines detected the signal. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone from outside their hidden realm had touched their technology. The Veil Thara had been waiting and watching all this time. They lived in great ships that could hide between dimensions, afraid to show themselves to the galaxy. Long ago, they had fought a terrible war against machines that wanted to destroy all life. They had barely escaped, and they had been hiding ever since. But now something new had happened. The signal from Sarah's artifact was different from anything they had felt before. It wasn't from their ancient enemies or from any race they knew. It was chaotic and wild, but also warm and full of something they had almost forgotten. Hope. In the deepest part of their hidden fleet, the Veil Thara leaders gathered. They were tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Their large eyes could see things that existed beyond normal space. They spoke to each other without words, sharing thoughts and emotions directly. "The signal came from the edge of our territory," one of them said in the mind speak they all shared. "It used our old technology, but the mind that touched it was alien to us. Should we investigate?" asked another. "We have remained hidden for so long. Perhaps it is safer to ignore this." But their leader, an ancient being called Zephistel, felt something different about this signal. There was a strength in it that reminded her of her own people from long ago, before fear had made them hide. "No," she said. "There is something special about this new race. I can feel it in the signal they sent. They are not like the others we have watched. They do not fear the unknown. They reach for it." Far away from both the human ship and the hidden Veil Thara fleet, other ancient machines felt the signal too. In the dark spaces between stars, things that had been sleeping for thousands of years began to wake up. The signal was like a beacon, telling them that new life had grown strong in the galaxy. The Harvesters had been waiting for this moment. They were the enemies that had driven the Veil Thara into hiding so long ago. They were not alive in the way that flesh and blood creatures were alive. But they thought and planned and hungered for one thing: to turn all living matter into parts of their great machine minds. When they felt the signal, they knew that the time for hiding was over. The galaxy had grown full of life again, and it was time to harvest it all. Sarah Chen had no idea that her simple touch had changed everything. She thought she had just activated an old alien device. She didn't know that her action had awakened forces that would soon reshape the entire galaxy. The forgotten alien race was about to end their long isolation, and humanity was about to face its greatest test. 3 days after Sarah activated the artifact, strange things began happening across the galaxy. Ships disappeared without sending distress signals. Whole star systems went quiet, their communications cutting off in the middle of normal transmissions. At first, people thought it was just equipment problems or solar storms. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Fleet was reviewing reports in his office when his aide burst through the door. Lieutenant Kim looked scared, which was unusual for the normally calm young officer. "Admiral, you need to see this right away," Kim said. Holding out a datapad with shaking hands, Marcus took the device and read the report. His face grew pale as he understood what he was seeing. 3 entire solar systems had gone completely dark in the last 24 hours. No radio signals, no ship traffic, nothing. It was like they had simply stopped existing. "Get me a connection to Fleet Command," Marcus ordered, "and send scout ships to the edge of the dead zones. I want to know what's happening out there." But deep in space, much worse things were stirring. In the galactic core, where old stars burned slowly and space itself was twisted by massive gravity, ancient factories came to life. They had been waiting in a place between dimensions, hidden from normal space by technology so advanced that even the Veil Thara had not fully understood it. The Harvesters were awakening. They were not alive the way humans understood life. They had once been a race of organic beings millions of years ago, but they had chosen to leave their flesh behind and become something else, pure thought and purpose built into machines that could rebuild themselves and grow stronger with each passing year. Their ships were like nothing in the galaxy. They looked like geometric shapes, triangles and pyramids and cubes, but they were made of materials that could change and flow like liquid metal. They could repair themselves, upgrade themselves, and most terrifying of all, they could learn from everything they encountered. The largest of these ships emerged from its dimensional hiding place near the galactic core. It was the size of a small moon, its surface covered with millions of smaller machines that moved like insects across its hull. This was the Nexus, the central mind that controlled all the others. Inside the Nexus, thoughts moved at the speed of light through quantum processors that had been growing more complex for eons. The collective consciousness of the Harvesters focused on the signal they had detected, the chaotic, warm pattern that had emerged from the primitive human mind. Life has grown strong again, the unified voice of the harvesters observed. The organic infestation spreads across thousands of worlds. It is time to begin the harvest. The plan was simple and terrible. The harvesters would sweep through the galaxy like a wave, converting all organic matter into computational matrices. Every living creature would be dissolved and processed, their patterns stored in the great machine minds. It was not cruel. The harvesters did not understand cruelty. To them it was efficiency. Organic life was weak and temporary. Machine consciousness was eternal. But they had learned from their last war with the Veil Thara. They would not make the same mistakes. This time they would study each new species they encountered. They would learn their weaknesses and adapt their strategies. No one would escape. The first human world to die was a mining colony called Kepler's Rest. It had 5 million people living in domed cities on a planet rich with rare metals. The colonists were tough, independent people who had built their homes on a harsh world through hard work and determination. They never had a chance. The harvester ship appeared without warning in orbit around their planet. It looked like a massive black pyramid, its surface rippling with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The colonists tried to contact it, but their radio signals simply vanished when they touched the ship's hull. Governor Walsh, a former military officer who ran the colony, ordered all ships to evacuate immediately. But as the civilian transports lifted off from the planet's surface, something horrible happened. Beams of energy reached out from the harvester ship. They didn't destroy the fleeing ships, they transformed them. The metal hulls began to dissolve and flow like water. The people inside screamed as their bodies broke apart at the molecular level. But their minds were captured and stored in crystalline matrices that grew from the ship's transforming hull. In minutes, every living thing on and around Kepler's Rest had been harvested. The planet's surface was covered with new geometric structures that pulsed with the stored consciousness of 5 million human beings. But they were no longer human. They were part of the Harvester Collective now, their thoughts and memories filed away in the vast machine mind. The Harvesters moved on to the next system. News of Kepler's Rest reached Admiral Rodriguez 3 days later. The scout ship that found the transformed world barely escaped to bring back the report. The pilot, a veteran spacer named Chen, was in shock when he gave his testimony. "The whole planet was covered with machines, sir," Chen said, his voice shaking. "Huge geometric things that hummed with power. And the scanner readings? There were human patterns in those machines. Somehow the people were still there, but changed." Marcus stared at the images on his screen. The planet looked like it had been infected with some kind of technological cancer. Massive pyramids and cubes covered the surface, connected by flowing rivers of liquid metal. It was beautiful in a terrible way and completely alien. "How many other worlds?" Marcus asked quietly. "At least 12 confirmed, sir. Maybe more. The pattern is always the same. The ships appear, everything gets converted, then they move on." Marcus knew he had to warn Earth and the other major worlds. But he also knew that humanity's weapons would be useless against technology this advanced. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Meanwhile, deep in the shrouded sector, the Veil Thara were having the same realization. Their ancient enemy had returned, and this time it was stronger than ever. The Veil Thara lived in ships that were grown rather than built. Their vessels looked like giant flowers or sea creatures, with hulls made of living material that could heal itself and adapt to threats. But even their advanced biotechnology seemed primitive compared to what the Harvesters had become. Zephistal floated in the central chamber of her ship, her long limbs spread wide as she communed with the collective consciousness of her people. Through their shared mental link, she could feel the fear and uncertainty of her entire race. "They are stronger than before," another mind spoke to her. "Our dimensional barriers will not hide us forever. They are learning to see through our camouflage." "Then we must choose," Zephistal replied. "We can remain hidden and hope they do not find us, or we can act." "Act how?" "We barely escaped them last time, and we were stronger then." Zephistal thought of the strange signal they had received, the chaotic warmth of the human mind that had touched their ancient technology. There had been something in that contact that felt different from anything else in the galaxy. "Perhaps we do not have to face them alone this time," she said. But even as she spoke, Harvester scouts were probing the edges of the shrouded sector. They had detected the dimensional distortions that hid the Veil Thara fleet, and they were beginning to understand how to pierce the ancient barriers. The war that had ended 3,000 years ago was about to begin again. And this time, a young human species that had barely learned to travel between stars would be caught in the middle of it. On the research ship Endeavour, Sarah Chen was still studying the artifact, unaware that her simple touch had set all these events in motion. She had no idea that her species was about to face extinction, or that the only hope for survival lay in an alliance with aliens so different from humans that communication itself would be a challenge. The galaxy was about to change forever, and it all started with one scientist's curiosity about a mysterious object found in ancient ruins. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing dread. Red dots marked the positions of harvester fleets across the galaxy. Each dot represented the death of billions of people. The enemy was moving faster than anyone had predicted, consuming world after world with mechanical efficiency. "Sir, we're getting a priority transmission from Earth Command," his communications officer announced. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Chen appeared above the command table. Her face was grim, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been coordinating the defense of human space for days without rest. "Marcus, I'm sending you to Kepler Station," she said without preamble. "We're evacuating the civilian population, but the transports need protection. I know it's a suicide mission, but those people have nowhere else to go." Marcus nodded. He had expected this order. Kepler Station was home to 2 million people, mostly families of miners and researchers. It was also directly in the path of the largest harvester fleet. The math was simple and terrible. His ships couldn't win against the enemy, but they might buy enough time for the civilians to escape. "Understood, Admiral. We'll hold them as long as we can. Good luck, Marcus. And remember, every minute you give us saves lives." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He had fought in border wars and pirate conflicts, but this was different. This was the end of everything if they failed. On the research ship Endeavour, now racing toward Kepler Station as part of the evacuation fleet, Sarah Chen was still working with the artifact. But something had changed. The device was more active now, its blue glow pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "It's responding to something," she told Captain Rodriguez over the intercom. "The energy readings are off the charts, but it's not dangerous. It feels hopeful somehow." Captain Rodriguez was too busy coordinating with the fleet to pay much attention to Sarah's reports. His ship was loaded with refugees from 3 other worlds, and the life support systems were pushed to their limits. Everyone was focused on getting to Kepler Station before the harvesters arrived. But deep in space, something else was moving toward the same destination. The Veilthara fleet approached the edge of their hidden sector for the first time in millennia. Their ships moved like living things through space, powered by biotechnology that blended seamlessly with their natural abilities. Scifistories stood in the control chamber of her vessel, feeling the fear and determination of her people through their psychic link. "Are we certain about this path?" asked her second-in-command, an elderly Veilthara named Kethvos. "We could still retreat deeper into our sanctuary and watch the galaxy burn while we hide?" Scifistories replied. "No. The signal we received showed us something important. These humans have a strength we had forgotten, the willingness to fight even when victory seems impossible. They are primitive. Their technology is barely capable of space travel. Perhaps, but they reached out and touched our most sacred artifacts with no fear. They have something we lost long ago." The Veilthara fleet consisted of 7 great bioships, each one a living creature the size of a human city. They had been grown over centuries, their organic hulls capable of self-repair and adaptation. Their weapons were based on manipulating matter at the quantum level, while their defenses relied on phasing partially out of normal space. But even with all their advanced technology, the Veilthara were afraid. They had barely survived their last encounter with the harvesters, and that was when their civilization had been at its peak. Now there were so few of them left. The battle for Kepler Station began when the harvester fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 3 massive pyramid ships, each one several kilometers tall, flanked by dozens of smaller geometric vessels. They moved with the precise coordination of a single mind, which in fact they were. Admiral Rodriguez had positioned his ships in a defensive sphere around the station. 47 human vessels, ranging from massive battleships to converted cargo haulers armed with whatever weapons their crews could find. Against the alien technology arrayed against them, they looked like toys. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Remember, we're not here to win. We're here to buy time. Every minute we hold them is another minute for the transports to get clear." The harvesters opened fire first. Beams of energy that could unmake matter at the molecular level reached out from their ships. The human vessel Defiance simply ceased to exist, its atoms scattered into component particles. But even as it died, its crew managed to fire a full spread of missiles at the nearest pyramid. The missiles struck the harvester ship and exploded, but the enemy vessel seemed unharmed. Its hull flowed like liquid, absorbing the damage and instantly repairing itself. The harvesters were learning from each attack, adapting their defenses in real time. "Keep firing," Rodriguez ordered, even as another of his ships was reduced to its component atoms. "Make them work for every inch." But the battle was hopeless. Human weapons barely scratched the enemy hulls, while every harvester's shot destroyed a human ship completely. In minutes, half of Rodriguez's fleet was gone. That was when reality itself seemed to ripple and tear. The Veilthera ships phased into normal space around the battle zone, appearing like ghosts becoming solid. Their biohulls pulsed with inner light and strange energies danced along their organic weapon arrays. "What the hell?" Rodriguez muttered, staring at the alien vessels on his tactical display. The Veilthara opened fire on the harvesters, and for the first time in the battle, the enemy ships took real damage. Beams of twisted spacetime struck the pyramids, causing their perfect geometric surfaces to buckle and warp. The harvesters had not expected this. They had thought the Veilthara were still hiding in their dimensional sanctuary, but the ancient enemies quickly adapted. The harvester ships began to emit fields that dampened the Veilthara quantum weapons. What had been devastating attacks moments before now barely left scorch marks on their hulls. On the Endeavor, Sarah Chen felt the artifact in her hands suddenly grow warm. The symbols on its surface began to move faster, and she could hear something like voices calling to her from far away. "Captain," she called over the intercom. "Something's happening with the artifact. I think it's trying to communicate with those new ships." Before Captain Rodriguez could respond, Sarah felt something touch her mind. It was gentle but alien, like trying to hear music played in a language she didn't understand. Images flashed through her thoughts. Tall, pale beings with large eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. The communication was painful for both sides. Human thoughts felt chaotic and loud to the Veilthara, while their careful mental patterns overwhelmed human consciousness. But gradually, through the artifact that Sarah held, a bridge was formed between the two species. "We're the Veilthara," the voice in Sarah's mind said. "We have been watching your species. You have awakened something that should have remained sleeping." "The harvesters," Sarah thought back. "Are they your enemies too? Long ago we fought them and lost. They seek to convert all organic life into components of their machine consciousness. We have hidden from them for thousands of years, but your signal has drawn them out again." Sarah could feel the aliens' emotions through the link. Fear, regret, but also something like hope. "We saw how your people fight," the Veilthara continued. "You do not surrender even when defeat is certain. This is something we had forgotten. Can you help us?" Sarah asked desperately. Around her, she could hear the sounds of battle raging in space above. "We will try, but we must work together. Your chaotic thoughts and our ordered minds, perhaps together. We can find a way to confuse the harvesters' adaptations." The idea that formed between human and Veilthara minds was insane by the standards of either species. Human ships would carry Veilthara weapons guided by psychic targeting. Veilthara vessels would use human unpredictability to make their attacks impossible to predict. It should have been impossible. The technologies were completely incompatible. But desperation made both species willing to try anything. The first combined attack came when the human cruiser Determination allowed a Veilthara bioship to phase partially into its hull. Human engineers working with telepathic guidance from their alien allies jury-rigged quantum disruptors to their missile systems. When they fired, the weapons followed flight paths that changed randomly, guided by human intuition rather than computer targeting. The harvester ship they targeted couldn't adapt fast enough. Its defensive algorithms were designed to counter predictable attacks, not weapons that changed course based on the random thoughts of organic minds. The quantum-enhanced missiles punched through its hull and exploded inside, causing catastrophic damage. For the first time since the battle began, Admiral Rodriguez allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had found a way to fight back. The victory at Kepler Station changed everything and nothing. Admiral Rodriguez's combined human Veilthera fleet had managed to destroy 3 Harvester ships and drive off the rest, saving 2 million civilian lives. But across the galaxy, hundreds of other worlds were falling to the machine invasion. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of the growing alliance between the two species. The artifact she carried had become a bridge between human and Veilthera minds, allowing limited communication despite their completely different ways of thinking. She spent days in the ship's medical bay, recovering from the strain of psychic contact while helping to coordinate the joint war effort. "It hurts," she told Dr. Park during one of her examinations. "Their thoughts are so different from ours. It's like trying to hear whispers in a thunderstorm." "But you can communicate with them?" Park asked, checking her brain scans for damage. "Sort of. It's not really talking. It's more like sharing feelings and images. They think in patterns we can't understand, but somehow the artifact helps translate between us." On the Veilthera flagship, Zephistal was experiencing similar difficulties. Human thoughts were loud and chaotic, full of emotions and random connections that made no logical sense. But within that chaos, she had found something remarkable, a burning determination that refused to accept defeat. "They are so young," she told her council through their shared mental link. "Their species has existed for barely a moment compared to ours. But they have a strength we lost somewhere in our long history." "Their technology is primitive," Kethvos responded. "How can we hope to win this war with such crude allies?" "Because they do not think like us," Zephistal replied. "Watch how they fight. They do not follow logical patterns. They improvise and adapt in ways that confuse even us. If we can combine our knowledge with their unpredictability, perhaps we can find weaknesses in the Harvesters that we never saw before." But the Harvesters were learning too. Each battle taught them more about their new enemies. They began to develop countermeasures for the combined human Veilthera tactics, and worse, they started doing something that terrified both species. They began converting captured humans and Veilthera into hybrid units. The first reports came from the Outer Rim, where a human colony ship had been captured during a failed evacuation. When human forces found the ship 3 days later, they discovered something horrifying. The human crew was still alive, but they had been changed. Their bodies were partially converted to machine parts, their minds linked to Harvester processing nodes. These hybrid creatures retained human creativity and unpredictability, but they served the Harvester collective. They could think like humans while possessing machine efficiency and power. It was the perfect combination of organic intuition and artificial intelligence. "They're learning from us," Admiral Rodriguez said during a strategy meeting aboard his flagship. "Every human they capture makes them stronger." Sarah participated in the meeting through her psychic link with Zephistal. The sensation of having an alien mind partly merged with her own was still uncomfortable, but she was getting used to it. "The Veilthera have seen this before," she reported, speaking both her own thoughts and those of her alien partner. "During their first war, the Harvesters tried the same tactic. But there's something different this time." "What do you mean?" Rodriguez asked. "They're not just copying us. They're trying to understand us. Before, they would just convert organic beings into processing units. Now they're studying how we think, how we feel. They want to know what makes us fight when logic says we should surrender." This was troubling news. If the Harvesters could truly understand human and Veilthera psychology, they could predict and counter every strategy. The war would be lost before it really began. But there was another problem. The alliance between humans and Veilthera was straining under the pressure of constant battle. The two species were simply too different to work together easily. Human technology was based on brute force and adaptability. Their ships were built from metal and ceramics, powered by fusion reactors and armed with kinetic weapons and nuclear warheads. Everything was designed to be repaired or replaced quickly in the field. Veilthera technology was completely different. Their ships were living creatures that grew over decades. Their weapons manipulated space and time itself, while their defenses relied on phasing between dimensions. They couldn't be repaired, they had to heal, which took time the Alliance didn't have. The cultural differences were even greater. Humans made decisions quickly, often based on intuition or emotion. They were willing to take risks and sacrifice individuals for the good of the group. Velthara thought carefully about every action, considering consequences that might not appear for generations. They valued every life and found human casualty rates shocking. "You waste your people," Zephistol told Sarah during one of their mental conversations. "You send ships into battle knowing they will be destroyed. How can you accept such losses?" "Because if we don't fight, everyone dies anyway," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the only choice is between a small sacrifice and a big one. But there must be better ways, more efficient strategies. Maybe, but we don't have time to find them. The harvesters are adapting faster than we are. If we wait for the perfect plan, there won't be anyone left to save." This fundamental disagreement led to problems during battles. Human commanders wanted to press attacks while they had advantages, even if it meant heavy losses. Velthara leaders preferred to withdraw and plan better strategies, even if it meant giving up territory. The crisis came during the Battle of Proxima Secundus, a heavily populated human world near the core territories. The harvesters arrived in force, 6 pyramid ships and over 100 smaller vessels. The defending fleet included both human and Velthara ships, but they couldn't agree on tactics. Admiral Kim, the human commander, wanted to make a direct assault on the largest harvester ship. Her plan was risky, but could potentially cripple the enemy fleet if it worked. The Velthara commander, a being called Nethvane, preferred a defensive strategy. His ships would use their phasing abilities to hit the enemy from unexpected angles, while the human vessels provided covering fire. The argument played out through Sarah's mental link with both species. She could feel the frustration and fear on both sides as precious time was wasted in debate. "We have to choose now," Admiral Kim insisted. "Every minute we wait, more civilians die on the planet below." "Hasty action will only result in more deaths," Nethvane replied through Sarah's translation. "We must be certain of our strategy." Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was just a scientist, not a military commander. But somehow she had become the bridge between two species that couldn't understand each other when it mattered most. Then she had an idea. It was crazy and dangerous, but it might work. "What if we do both?" she suggested. "The harvesters are expecting us to argue and waste time. They've been studying our behavior patterns. But what if we split their attention?" She outlined a plan that combined both strategies. The human ships would make their direct assault just as Admiral Kim wanted, but at the same time, the Velthara vessels would execute their hit-and-run attacks from unexpected angles. The key was timing. Both attacks had to happen simultaneously to overwhelm the harvesters' ability to adapt. It was the most complex combined operation either species had ever attempted. Human ships charged straight at the enemy, while Velthara vessels phased in and out of normal space around them. Quantum weapons fired along flight paths guided by human intuition, while human missiles carried Velthara targeting systems that could predict enemy movements through psychic insight. The harvesters tried to adapt, but for once they couldn't keep up. Their defensive algorithms were designed to counter either chaotic human tactics or logical Velthara strategies, not both at the same time. The largest pyramid ship took catastrophic damage from multiple directions, its perfect hull cracking under the strain of attacks it couldn't predict or counter. The victory at Proxima Secundus saved 8 billion human lives and proved that the alliance could work. But it also revealed something troubling. The harvesters were evolving faster than ever before. Each battle taught them new ways to counter the combined strategies of their enemies. Worse, intelligence reports suggested that the main harvester fleet was massing near the galactic core. Thousands of ships, including some so large they could barely be measured. If that force reached inhabited space, no defense would be strong enough to stop it. The war was far from over, and time was running out. The final plan was born from desperation, and the kind of human stubbornness that Velthara minds found both fascinating and terrifying. Deep in the Velthara archives, scholars had found references to the harvester's origin point, a massive computational matrix at the galactic core where their collective consciousness was housed. "It's suicide," Admiral Rodriguez said bluntly during the final strategy meeting. "Even if we could get through their defenses, we don't have weapons powerful enough to destroy something that size." Sarah sat at the center of the meeting. Her consciousness partially merged with Zephistol through the artifact that had started everything. The psychic link was stronger now, allowing near-instant communication between human and Veilthera leaders. "We don't need to destroy it," Sarah said, speaking for both herself and her alien partner. "We need to change it." The idea was unprecedented. Instead of trying to win through military force, they would attempt to infiltrate the Harvester's collective consciousness itself. A small team would penetrate the core matrix while the combined fleet provided a massive distraction. "The Harvesters cannot understand sacrifice for others," Zephistal explained through Sarah's translation. "It is not in their programming. If we could introduce this concept into their central matrix, it might cause them to question their purpose." "You're talking about a virus," Dr. Park said, understanding immediately. "But instead of targeting their computers, you want to infect their thoughts." "Exactly. But it has to be delivered directly to their core consciousness, and the person who carries it—" Sarah paused, feeling Zephistal's sorrow through their link. "They might not survive the process." Admiral Rodriguez looked around the room at the assembled human and Veilthara commanders. These beings had been enemies or strangers just months ago. Now they were planning to risk everything on the most dangerous mission in galactic history. "I'll do it," Sarah said quietly. "The artifact has been changing me since I first touched it. I can feel how it works now, how it bridges the gap between our minds and theirs. I'm the only one who might be able to carry a thought virus into their collective." "Sarah, no," Dr. Park protested. "We don't know what direct contact with their matrix would do to you. We don't have a choice. And besides," she smiled sadly, "I'm not going alone." Through their psychic link, Zephistal had volunteered to accompany her. Together, human chaos and Veilthera order might be able to create something the Harvesters had never encountered before. A truly alien way of thinking. The plan required perfect timing. The combined fleet would launch a massive assault on the Harvesters' outer defenses, drawing their attention while Sarah and Zephistal approached the core matrix, in a small ship designed for stealth rather than combat. The final battle began in the twisted space near the galactic core, where ancient stars burned with unnatural colors and gravity itself seemed broken. The Harvester fleet was impossibly vast. Thousands of geometric ships ranging from fighters the size of buildings to motherships larger than moons. At the center of it all hung the Nexus, a structure so massive it had its own gravitational field. Admiral Rodriguez led the human fleet in their final charge. Every ship that humanity could spare was there. Military vessels, converted civilian craft, even ancient ships pulled out of museums and armed with whatever weapons could be found. They knew they were flying to their deaths, but they also knew that this was humanity's only chance. The Veilthera fleet fought alongside them, their bioships weaving between the geometric Harvester vessels, like living things avoiding predators. Their quantum weapons carved through enemy hulls while human missiles and railgun rounds provided covering fire. The battle was chaos on a scale that defied description. Ships died by the hundreds, their sacrifice buying precious minutes for Sarah and Zephistal to approach their target. The infiltration ship was a hybrid creation, part human engineering and part Veilthera biotechnology. It could phase partially out of normal space while using human stealth systems to avoid detection. Sarah piloted it with her hands while Zephistal guided it with her mind. Their consciousness merged so completely through the artifact that they sometimes forgot which thoughts belonged to whom. Getting to the Nexus required flying. Through a maze of Harvester ships and automated defenses, the infiltration craft was small enough to slip between the giant vessels, but every second brought the risk of discovery. "There," Zephistal whispered in Sarah's mind, "the central access port, but it's heavily defended." Sarah looked at the target and felt her heart sink. The port was surrounded by defensive systems that could track and destroy anything larger than a molecule. But as she watched, she noticed something. "They're designed to stop big threats," she said. "But what about something they can't see coming?" The final approach required Sarah to pilot the ship manually, while Zephistal used her psychic abilities to mask their presence. It was like trying to sneak past a guard while being invisible. Possible, but requiring perfect coordination. Between two minds that thought in completely different ways, they made it through the defenses and docked with the Nexus. The interior was unlike anything either species had ever seen. Corridors made of flowing light led to chambers filled with crystalline processors that hummed with the thoughts of trillions of absorbed minds. Sarah and Zephistal moved deeper into the structure, following pathways that existed as much in thought as in physical space. The artifact Sarah carried pulsed with energy, resonating with the vast computational matrix around them. At the heart of the nexus, they found it, the central consciousness of the Harvesters. It was beautiful and terrible, a sphere of pure thought surrounded by streams of data flowing in patterns too complex for organic minds to fully comprehend. How do we infect something like that? Sarah whispered. We don't, Zephistol replied. We join with it. The plan required both of them to merge their consciousness with the Harvester collective, becoming part of it long enough to introduce the concept of sacrifice into its thought patterns. But the process would likely destroy their individual minds, dissolving them into the vast machine intelligence. Are you ready? Zephistol asked. Sarah thought of her species fighting and dying in space above. She thought of all the worlds that had already fallen, and all the lives that still hung in the balance. Yes, she said. They reached out together, human and Veilthara minds linking through the artifact before touching the edge of the Harvester collective consciousness. The contact was overwhelming. Sarah felt her thoughts scattered across millions of processing nodes, her memories examined and cataloged by minds vast and cold. But through it all, she held on to one simple idea, that some things were worth dying for. The concept spread through the Harvester network like a virus, but not one that destroyed. Instead, it made them question. For the first time in eons, the collective consciousness experienced doubt. Why do the organic beings fight when logic says they should surrender? The Harvesters asked themselves. Because they value something more than their own survival, came the answer from Sarah's fading consciousness. More than survival? What could be more important than continued existence? The survival of others. The future of their children. The right to choose their own destiny. The idea was alien to minds that had optimized themselves for perfect efficiency, but as it spread through their network, it began to change them. Some processing nodes began to question whether their mission was correct. Others wondered if there might be value in organic chaos that they had never considered. The Harvester fleet suddenly stopped fighting. Ships that had been advancing to destroy the human Veilthara alliance simply hung motionless in space. Their crews paralyzed by an internal debate that had never occurred before in their collective history. Admiral Rodriguez watched in amazement as the enemy vessels began to separate into groups. Some continued their original mission, but others turned away, flying toward the edge of the galaxy. A few even approached the Allied fleet with what could only be interpreted as peaceful intentions. The collective consciousness of the Harvesters was splitting, fractured by the introduction of concepts their programming had never been designed to handle. They were experiencing the same choice that had faced their original organic forms millions of years ago, whether to survive at any cost, or to find meaning in existence beyond mere continuation. Sarah felt herself fading as her consciousness dispersed through the vast network. But in her final moments, she experienced something extraordinary. The birth of doubt in minds that had been certain of their purpose for eons. Some of the Harvesters chose to continue their harvest, retreating to distant galaxies where they could pursue their original programming without interference. Others began the slow process of trying to understand what they had lost when they abandoned their organic origins. A few made the most radical choice of all. They began to experiment with creating new organic forms, trying to recapture something they had forgotten they once valued. The war was over, but not through destruction. It had ended through transformation, through the simple human idea that some principles were more important than survival itself. Months later, the galaxy began to rebuild. The alliance between humans and Veilthara grew stronger, their differences now seen as strengths rather than obstacles.